Hello, welcome to today's Q&A video. I apologize for the delay. I was hoping to do this every 2 months. So last one was December, I was going to do February and then April. But we had a little bit of a tragedy in our space. A friend of mine, a subscriber and gaming buddy, passed away in January, very, very, very suddenly. And to be honest with you, I haven't really been in the mood to do any type of hobby-related stuff. I've been in the mood to play, but that's about it. It's been kind of hard to work even on commissions, and I needed to work on the commissions because that's for somebody else. But it hasn't been easy motivating myself. But thanks, having friends around keep encouraging me and all, and we were working through this together, our grief and all, but. I'm back with this particular Q&A, a little bit of a month late. That's why there's no videos in February, really. I'm just starting to get back into the swing of things. So today, quick little update because of those events. One of the things I was going to do as a result of a previous, actually this Q&A, was going to do an interview with the founder of Hedgehog Historicals. Founder Doug Rawson is actually the individual friend of ours that passed away, so obviously won't be able to have that, but we're going to try to continue doing this venture in his place. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to a question here, just to kind of fill in some details. So let's just jump right into the questions. I don't have any questions to pose to you guys this time. But let's just see what we've got. Okay. So starting with the first one. This one's from DM Dave. And it's when picking up a new game, do you look more at the background fluff of the game, the mechanics, or the models? And that's a good question because, I don't pick up games very often, and I look at what I do, or when I do pick up a new game, what is it that made me interested? So I think it mostly falls around genre first. So, for example, I've always been interested in fantasy battle stuff, and so I was eager to do Warhammer back when it was 8th edition, before it became Sigmar. When it was Sigmar, I lost interest in that, because again, I'm looking for the fantasy battle, the infantry squares and stuff. And then Kings of War looked like that was going to be a great one to move to. That kind of fizzled. And since there isn't really another one around in our space, Warlords of Erewhon kind of picked up. Now, I lose the idea of the blocks of infantry and being able to maneuver, those kind of things. But it's still the fantasy genre, which I enjoy, recreating those things. So genre is first, I think. After you get to the genre, in order for me to really be interested, it needs to have something I can relate to. For example, I enjoy military history, medieval time type stuff. There's been a couple games out related to Japanese medieval warfare and stuff. I don't know. Bushido is one of them, and then Warlord Games has one. I forget the name of it. Honor or something. I forget what it's called. But see, I'm not interested in that area. So even though it's the right period, I can't really relate to it. So I'm not interested. The World War II historicals and ancient historicals, I get into that because it's something I can identify with and relate to. So if you expand that, I think you can actually, think in terms a little bit of the fluff or background is kind of where that plays in. Because Warlords of Erewhon doesn't have any fluff, you can make your own. But, elves are elves, dwarves are dwarves, humans are humans. The stories are all kind of the same. You can write around it, and that's what kind of gets me interested. With 40K, I'm not big on science fiction in general. But here, again, there's a multitude of armies, and several of them, the story and the fluff kind of got me interested in. And so when I looked at the Imperial Guard, I could relate it to like World War II combat, right? So it was easy to make that transition, even though it was science fantasy, a genre I'm not typically interested in. There was that almost historical relationship that I could build on. And then when I looked at the Tau, which I really enjoyed, the aesthetics of the models, yes, did play a factor, but the play style was important. So once I know that I'm interested in the game, if I really want to pick it up, I want to make sure I'm going to enjoy the game mechanics. So it really is pretty much all the factors you talked about, you asked in your question, but it's just I start with the genre, which can include fluff, and then look at the models and mechanics. If it's something like really, the small minis, 6mm, 8mm, 10mm, 15mm, I'm not going to get into those. They're too small. It feels like I'm a spectator a mile away. I'm not interested in that. I don't feel like I'm more immersed. So model size has to do with it, the model aesthetics has to do with it, but then game mechanics. If I don't like the way the game plays, like Sigmar, I don't like the system. So I'm not going to pick that up, even though it's fantasy, and I do like fantasy. So again, genre or fluff, models, and then the game mechanics itself. All right, thanks for the question. Look forward to your next one. All right, so next one is from Idic Beer 40K. He was actually surprised he didn't ask a question on my previous Q&A. So, what is the longest time you have painted in one session? And that's something I've never actually thought about. And to be fair, I don't generally sit down and just paint for a long time. I tend to, I'll admit, I don't have a short attention span, but I don't like to just be painting. So I'll usually be painting something, a couple of units or whatever, or maybe several different units, and I'll rotate through those. But I'll force myself to stop, and I'll want to do something else. I'll usually start building another model, which just basically adds to my queue. But it does give me time for the other models dry, as the paint dries. I'll go off and do something else. So I'll take breaks, but it's all gaming related. However, there are days when I get into that mode of just sitting down and just going through it and enjoying. 'Cause for some reason that day, painting just feels like fun the whole time through. And so I think the longest I've ever painted, was a 5 hours straight. Now again, I'm bouncing between projects. Units are here, or maybe some vehicles here. They're all in different stages, so I'm just working across those different projects. But it would be 5 hours or so of painting. I don't think I've done anything longer than that, especially recently. So about 5 hours. Okay, thanks. I hope you put in another question this next month. Now, the next one is from John Pierce. He's actually a friend of mine. You may remember him from my bolt action videos. He plays the Rangers. And so, this is his question. A big question for you, he says. Why lead you to, or what basically led me to choose the factions I did? Of course, he knows me personally, and so I know why you chose the Poles for bolt action, but what about your other games? All right, so the other games are Black Seas, the Warlords of Erewhon, and 40K. 40K, I've got several factions. Imperial Guard, Tau, Orcs, and Eldar, Dark Eldar, and Tyranid, but all of those are related to the Exodites, which is an Elder lore. So, with 40K, it was all about the lore and the fluff for those particular factions. And with the Guard specifically, because the Guard could rebel against the Emperor and be renegades and ally with the Tau, I was able to build a really neat storyline for that. Exodites, I like elves in general, and so the Exodites were my space elves that I could actually use fantasy miniatures. I love converting models, so I have the lore And there's absolutely no units out there or no codex for Exodites, so I had free reign to make up what I could. Again, the approach I took was to take Eldar, Dark Eldar, and Tyranid codexes and use those unit entries to represent Exodites. So the conversion and the lore there. When it came to my orcs, I didn't really choose it. It was thrust upon me because we got the Black Reach starter set when Hunter wanted to get into 40k. So he got the Space Marines, I ended up with the orcs. It wasn't a bad deal because, I love converting models. I love the kit bashing the orc stuff and doing all the crazy things to the models that you get to do with orcs. So that's really what I enjoy. Now, the fluff for the orcs, yeah, it's okay. It's really the modeling. So that's why I chose the ones I chose. Now, the Necrons, which I just got into, the reason I got into that was more of I had the opportunity to get the models, and it was an army that kind of intrigued me. It's one that I can't get around the lore. It's good, but it's not really something that drives me to want to play that army. But I think some of the models are cool, and some of the unit ideas and the way the army plays is kind of neat. So I wanted to kind of play around with it, and I finally got a chance to acquire an army from a client of mine for doing painting for him, and that's the commission I'm working on right now. So it was a non-human army. I think in that case it was the units themselves, the models themselves kind of got me interested. So we'll see. I think I'm going to enjoy it, but we'll find out. It's a whole learning curve there with Necrons in 8th edition. So that's how we did that. Now with the Black Seas, that's a whole different story. Very historical, and I happen to love playing the factions that other people don't really think about or gravitate toward. I like to be the oddball, if you will. So most people, in my experience throughout the last many years, when it dealt with anything related to Age of Sail, no one really wanted to play the Spanish. So that's what I immediately gravitated toward. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is, fewer people play it, so I get to be a little bit more of I get to stand out a little bit. But the second one is, I think it's more of a challenge because I like playing underdogs. I like to play the difficult armies. It's a challenge. It really is a personal challenge to myself. So we're looking at, the Spanish, it costs extra to get veterans, and some of their ships you can't buy as veterans. So you're left with inexperienced and regular. So it's kind of, it's a little bit of a challenge when you compare that to looking at the bonuses that they get compared to the French bonuses or the British bonuses. They don't have a lot of good combat bonuses. So the Spanish, I think, fit me really well, being an underdog and the harder of the three navies, I think, to play. So, but that's my opinion, and that's something. And of course, I enjoy the history around it. So that's how I chose that one. Now for Blood Red Skies, again, that's all Polish, and I do like the German JG-26, Jägerschwader 26, that was flying around France, basically. So, Adolf Galland and that unit is something that I'm interested in. So I'll play that particular part in the Germans, but the rest will be the Poles, Squadron 303 and a Mosquito Squadron. I forget I think it's 316. And then I love the Black Sheep, because when I was a kid I watched Black Sheep Squadron on TV. And even though it wasn't historical, it was cool to watch the Corsairs flying around and fighting the Zeros. So that's how I chose and fell into that interest from when I was a kid. So I think that's everything. Well, again, that's elves. I love playing elves. So and I love playing Lizardmen too. Ever since I was young, in D&D, I loved Lizardmen. Even though you couldn't play as a character, I love the NPCs and the Lizardmen monsters, right? So that's why I am enjoying that in Warlords of Erewhon. All right, so thanks, Joker, for that. John Pierce is his nickname is Joker. So thanks, Joker, for that question. Hope there's another one coming. All right, sorry if this cut between the last scene and this is a little rough. I didn't realize I did not plug my camera in and battery died. All right, so let's move on to the next question. It's from Jeff Salzman, and he asks, what are your thoughts on balancing a list between expensive point-wise squads and multiple smaller units? There's actually two aspects to this, because they're kind of related, but I want to touch on it. The expensive wise, there's two reasons it'll be expensive. It's either elite, so it has a lot of abilities, capabilities, or it's large, or both. The other is obviously small. So we're going to kind of touch on both. But before I do that, because I'm going to speak in general, I want to clarify something. I want to kind of preface this with my comments around my bolt action armies. Personally, even though I'm going to give you a certain opinion in a second, when it comes to my bolt action armies, which are historical units that I'm trying to model, I'm trying to stick with the way the units were actually structured and the fighting strengths they usually had. So in the case of the Germans I happen to be playing, I'll usually run 7 or 8 to a squad, because that's, in the late war, that's kind of what they had. You listen to veterans, or survivors from the German infantry, they'll talk about, the squad size usually was around between 6 and 9. Most of the time they only had 7 guys in the field at any one time. So, and they'd be merging squads as needed. So I'll try to stick with historical 7-man-ish type with the Germans. With my Poles, it's a completely different story. I modeled Black Brigade when it comes to my early war Poles, so that is a mechanized cavalry brigade that did not change its structure. It changed its equipment. So a cavalry section was 6 men. Okay, so the infantry section for the brigade in a platoon was 6 men. Four sections of 6 each, plus anti-tank rifle team, a couple drivers for the trucks, the officer and his basically a bodyguard, call him a lookout observer. So you got about 30 guys. 24 of them are in these 6-man squads. Okay, so that's how I'll do the Black Brigade. Late war, the organization of the British platoon, and as a result, my Polish 1st Armor Division, would be 10 men. Now, they were never full strength, so I don't usually go with 10, but I'll often run it as 2 separate squads, 2 separate 5-man sections, because the doctrine, a fighting doctrine that they used, was that of a machine gun section, which was 3 men, and for the Bren, and then the rifle section, which was the remaining 7. Well, unfortunately, you can't have a 3-man squad in the British bolt action army, so I go with 5, and so I do 5 and 5. That allows me to kind of reflect the way the units actually fought in the war, and so that's how I do my Polish bolt action. All right, so putting that aside, my general thoughts on these two, and I'm not trying to take a shortcut through here, but it is going to be a little bit of an it depends answer. Generally, I do like going with multiple smaller squads. There's a couple reasons for this. The first is, when it comes to games that use activation dice, or some activation means where the number of models or number of units gives you a number of activation opportunities. For example, Dust, Bolt Action, World's Vera 1, Cav, all of them you activate based on the number of units, so you'll have an activation per unit. The more units you have, the more opportunity to get an activation coming your way, which means you'll be able to attain the initiative more often on your opponent, unless your opponent takes the same approach. When I have more, we'll use bolt actions now, more order dice, because I have more units than the opponent, I'm more likely to get the dice drawn for me, and I'll have more opportunity to act first or earlier in the game or in the turn than my opponent, just on average. Odds being what they are, it doesn't always work out that way, but a lot of times it does. So getting those extra units gives me those extra activation chances, and I can probably spring or set up my assaults and traps, if you will, before my opponent. So that's why I do like to go with the multiple small squads. Now, there's one problem with that, and then the small squads can be fragile, so you got to look at the game system and the way it plays. If it's easy to wipe out a small squad, and it's a kill point type game, obviously you're going to be the underdog, because you're going to be able to give up a lot of points and not be able to get them back from your opponent. So it's a risky thing, but I think it's still, from a tactical perspective, I think it's an appropriate way to approach the game. When it comes to objective holding, the more units you have, the more likely you're able to hold an objective or seize an objective, get an objective. Now, in addition, when you do have multiple smaller units, even though they're more fragile, you're likely, or more, yes, you're more likely to lose a unit, but if you had a 10-man, let's use a 40K example, you have a 10-man squad, right? You take casualties, and then you roll at the end of the turn a morale check. And by every point you fail your morale check by, you lose that many more models. Well, if you have a 10-man squad and take 5 casualties and you roll poorly, you're going to lose the rest of your guys. Okay. In a large area bolt action game, similarly, you've got a 10-man squad, you lose 5, you got to make a morale test. If you fail the morale test, you lose the whole unit. So, one squad wiped out, 10-man gone. If instead you have 2 smaller 5-man units, yeah, the 5-man unit gets wiped out, but the other 5 stick around. They're not affected by the loss of that one unit. So, that is something to think about as well. And again, remember, it's your playstyle has a lot to bear on what decision you're going to take here. If you like to run large squads, especially if you like to assault, it's very hard to be successful with assaulting with small numbers of models. You need a lot, so you can go in there and ensure that you get a lot of hits and a lot of damage, as opposed to the damage you're going to take. I've run into too many situations where my small 5-man squads would run in to close combat, even when the odds were in their favor, and the opponent could undo my assault simply because they happen to roll a couple more dice or a couple more hits than me. Since I only get 5, for example, attacks, they might get 8. If they get an extra 1 over me, I'm done. So I like to go with multiple small, unless I'm going with my in close combat. And as an example, my bolt action army for my Carpathian Independent Brigade, which are the Poles that fought in North Africa during 1941, are an example of that. I typically run, for most of my infantry squads there, a 10-man squad, because they were full strength. And they didn't really have the opportunity to do the fire team, rifle team, and Bren team, simply because the open terrain. There just wasn't the opportunity to do that maneuvering. So 10-man squads it usually is. If I happen to be using my Uhlans, which are the Lancers, they will be a 5-man squad mounted in a carrier, Bren carrier. So that's why they're 5-man squads. But that's a historical unit that I'm trying to reflect there. But typically, because I'm going to try to do more assaulting and close combat with my Carpathian Independent Brigade, I'll go with the 10-man squad in that case. So that's kind of the way I approach it. I hope, Jeff, that gave you some things to think about. If you want, you can actually go take a look at my video, if you haven't already. I think you may have, but about small unit size. And I'll go put a link up here, one of these places. Check it out and see. I talk a little bit more about going with small units and why you might or might not want to do that. Okay? All right, so thanks for the question. I hope to see more from you. All right, now, the last question for today. This was from JVC Paints, and I mentioned in my last video about the Hedgehog Historicals, and he asked how long did it take you to set up the NPO, nonprofit organization? Okay, good news, bad news on this question. Bad news is I can't give you the complete answer because I don't know. I wasn't actually involved in the complete setup. Doug Rawson was the one who had this idea to do this, and he did all that legwork himself. Several of us did kind of help him and support him on it, but he had to do the paperwork. So it really doesn't take too much, at least in our state. So you'll have to look at the state regs, but we had to create articles of incorporation, so you have to have a purpose for your organization, find a bunch of individuals to serve as officers in that organization. You'll fill out the form. In our case, you indicate that it's a nonprofit organization. Now, that doesn't make it a nonprofit out of the gate, but at least it lets the government know this is what you're trying to set up and the type of organization you're setting up. Once you get your papers back that say you have an organization incorporated, you get your employee identification number now, or employer identification number. From that point, then you can submit to your state or federal government an application for the 501c3 organization tax exempt status. Doug took care of that. We haven't heard back from the government on our application that we've been incorporated, but we don't have the nonprofit status recognized by the government yet. So we have to do some legwork to figure out what happened there. So it's been took about a month or so to get the articles of incorporation sent in, and for us to actually get our employer identification number. And it's been a couple months since Doug sent in the application for the 501c3. Hasn't come in yet, so they told us it might take a month or two, but that should have been back to us last month, just to give you an idea. So it could take as little as 3 or 4 months. It may take longer. It depends on what you want to do or what you're trying to get going. You definitely going to want to try to talk to individuals that you happen to know in your area that have done that, because remember, state laws are always different, and there may be some wrinkles in each different states. But you'll also want to make sure that you understand what is going to be required once you do set it up, as far as reporting and the difference between actually having a recognized nonprofit and one that doesn't have the tax exempt status yet. So, rules might be differing states. So you got to be careful. If you have to, you might want to talk to someone in the legal space to get some more information about it. We haven't done that yet because Doug was taking care of that. So that's the best I can say. It doesn't really take that long, but it is the government, so you're waiting on them a lot more than you actually doing any work. So, all right. So I hope that kind of answers your question. It gives you sheds some light on it. Thanks for the question, and please feel free to comment below. All right. So thank you for the questions this month. Please feel free down below again to comment, ask more questions, and I invite all new subscribers to do the same. Even any topic is really on the table. Doesn't really matter, gaming related or not. Whatever you're interested in doing or asking, I'm open for. So thank you very much. Share, like, and subscribe if you haven't already, and especially if you find that there's some of your friends can benefit from some of the material I'm putting out. Please share it with them, because I've found that a lot of individuals who have stumbled across my material have actually benefited, learning wise from some of the videos I've put out. So I want to make sure that that information gets to as many people as possible, even if they do end up playing me and I end up having a more difficult time playing them. All right, so thank you very much, everybody. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.